Can you just tell me a little bit, just give me a little bit of your background, growing up in Harlem and how you came, how, what it was like kind of back then, and just if you can include what the family dynamic
Taping this,
was.
or are you writing this, or what?
I'm recording this right now, yeah, but I'm
Okay,
gonna,
cool.
yeah.
I was born, I was born October 29th, 1959, so I'm 50. Um, I grew up in, the 60s and the early 70s, and actually I was raised between Harlem and the South Bronx, but primarily Harlem. And where I was in Harlem, it was like my immediate block was like Central Harlem, and you go down the block, it's El Barrio. So although, yeah, I mean, I'm obviously, not obviously, I mean, I'm Black American, but I also include New York, which is New York, Puerto Rican, as part of my culture.
Uh huh.
It was tough back then. It was, I mean, now it's getting gentrified, although that's still also that, but it's still, that part of Harlem is still rough. I mean, mostly people are moving to the west side, but there, I mean, I grew up a lot around and in, addiction, a lot of prostitution, cops on the street then. There were really very few Black and Hispanic cops, so you'd get cops who were hassling Black and Spanish boys at night just for the hell of it. But simultaneously, you had also people who deserved to get hassled because it was just rough. I mean, it went from heroin to dust to back to heroin, crack cocaine, which is now where it's at. So it was very hard to live on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
My thing was not to get pregnant or not to turn into a dope fiend. That wasn't a problem for me, but other people want to take you down with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I would tend to do is like stay out of the hood. So my fighting was not so much about, oh, well, you want to be in my gang or what have you. My thing was because there's the freak, she's listening to other stuff, she's doing different things than people in the block. Because, I grew up during the disco, the disco, the funk era. I mean, funk I did like. I mean, like George Clinton, all that kind of stuff. But I was also a rock fan.
Right.
It really separated me, right? Because they say, oh, here comes a white girl, she's listening to rock and roll.
Right, right.
And it's, like any hood, people take on the very bias. Part of the reason why people are oppressed is, again, certainly socioeconomics and racism plays a role in it. But people taking on the very bias that's been done onto them and perpetuated. In other words, in order for you to be Black or Spanish, you have to live in the hood. I mean, that's the brainwashing that comes with racism.
Right, right.
You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, in order for you to be Black or what have you, you have to listen to a certain kind of music. I mean, certainly there's racism, but there's also, the individual. There's a great writer called Robert Burns who says, beyond race, beyond color, beyond gender, you're a citizen of the world.
Right.
So, and I was, venturing now coming down to the East Village to hang out, and I read a lot. So I knew that there was something beyond where I was, but I just had very few people to validate that.
So, I guess is Monster the most autobiographical content that you've written, or?
All of it. I mean, can most people? I mean, you don't really like answer that because I mean, most people have interesting stories. I mean, it's like all of them. A lot of Monster has a lot to do with me. A lot of it has nothing to do with me.
Okay.
Because a lot of it comes out of the imagination. Because what happened with that genre, the reason why I began to write one people's stuff is because in the 70s and 80s, and now I guess we've even gone back to it now, is that there really wasn't, the roles for Black actors weren't that great. Now, what's happened is that like for black males, the work is better. Mm-hmm. For Black females, it's not that great.
Right.
And so, then it was worse. So I began to write my own stuff. Out of that, and it's like some of it again has a lot to do with me. Some of it is just strictly out of the imagination. So that's what happened with the genre. What happened late 80s, early 90s on, is that people began to write these autobiographical things simply because they were actors and they were unemployed.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not just about their own story. Most people have an interesting story. It doesn't mean that it's a piece of theater, because theater is about language, and it's about a beginning, a middle, an end, a story, a conflict, and a resolution. Most people are interesting, but it doesn't mean that, you can write a play about it, nor should there be a play or a film or what have you, or a book.
So, I guess next I want to talk about just sort of the content, the consistency in your work that sort of involves parents, families, and children ultimately becoming their parents or something like
Yeah,
their
the
parents.
legacies of the yeah. I tend to write about the sins of the father and the sins of the mother.
Right.
Because I do tend to think there's this great writer. He's Turkish, Khalil Gibran. He's most famous for a book called The Prophet.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know The Prophet?
Oh yeah, I
He
got
has the
that.
great saying that comes out: "Your children are not. Your children pass through you. They're not of you."
Uh-huh. Yep. Yep.
Well, and I think sometimes, people talk about parents this, parents that. I think there are certain people on the planet who should not have kids.
Right.
I also tend to think, sometimes, like, as people get older, I mean, they look at, they want to claim, it's like, I did the best I could. If their kids turn out badly, of course, they want nothing to do with that. When their kids turn out well, they want to claim all the
Right. Right. Mm-hmm.
And I think it can go both ways. It's like also sometimes I think there are certain people who have to, certain kids who have to give birth to themselves.
Right.
Because I tend to write about the darker side of human nature. That thing is just something that interests me.
Well, in Monster, can you tell me a little bit about Marsha and I guess being suicidal, and how does obviously her family and her home environment is affecting her self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
Can you expand on that and how you think that's sort of is that inevitable, or do you think some children have the ability to um, overcome that within themselves? It's innate.
Um, I think. So. I mean, even with her, to a certain degree, like when you read that piece, it's like when Teresa's saying, I gotta get, I have to go. Marsha's tragic. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Right.
She comes from a place of hell, but the act of suicide. Although I understand it when people feel bad about themselves to the point where they feel they want to destroy themselves, it's also a vicious act.
Mm-hmm.
Because what it does is also punish the people who are living with kids. And also suicide is very high among children. People don't realize that.
Oh yeah.
I wanted to look at that. But ultimately I do think that there are certain people who just do feel hopeless, but again, giving a mixed message. Even within that hopelessness, it's like they know there's that iota, but I guess they don't trust it enough.
Right.
Or they're not, for lack of a better term, brave enough to go with that iota and go, you know what, this is going to be tough, but I can live through this.
Tell me a little bit more about the mother's struggle and how you believe that struggle is present in so many of our American homes, and how many people get lost like Teresa's mother did.
I have a certain amount of empathy for Teresa's mother, and she is a character. Do you have to like her? No, but you have to understand her. But what annoys me about that character and people like that, men and women, is that they don't utilize their choices, because unlike, say, like Marsha, who's a kid, right? I have more sympathy, and then again, I have sympathy for them too. But you must know on a certain level when you're drinking and you're drugging like that, and you have a child in the world. It's like, okay, as bad as I feel for you, you're now endangering your kid.
Mm-hmm.
Do I realize, again, within the community, that racism plays a major role? Yes, it does. The socioeconomics and racism, tongue kiss, go hand in hand and play a major role. Yes, but then again, as one gets older, if you're, because the mother in that is well grown. In a weird kind of a way, I do understand her, but I despise the fact that she exposed her kid to that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it is prevalent within it's prevalent not just in our community, but in major communities.
Right.
In other people's communities as well. But I really do think now, as with an adult versus someone like Marsha, there is much more of a choice. And that person, yes, they were young, and yes, they were damaged, but still, a lot of people come from damaged backgrounds. You have to pick yourself up.